I should just say you've got 3, not 4 panelists today. Kathy Sudlow, unfortunately, but typical for a health section, has been taken unwell. So let's send our very best to Kathy. But I'm sure what we get from the session will be some amazing solutions that can help her get better soon. So welcome, everybody. So listen, great to see you here. As ever, it's an interactive session. So let's try and see where we can get to in terms of this. We're talking about health. Health, by the way, as you heard, I'm the chair of the Alan Turing Institute. Health is one of those domains that we said wanted to be a real focus, along with the environment and defense and security. And in some ways, for those of us who've been around in this space for a while, you could say it's a bit frustrating that we've taken this extraordinary transformative technology and we've done an amazing job in deploying it against shopping, dating, and gossip. That's fundamentally the use cases that we've succeeded. Healthcare, maybe not so much. But fortunately, we have an amazing panel today who are going to help fix that. So hopefully by the time we leave, and with your support, we'll actually know what all the solutions are to do as good a job for healthcare as we've done for shopping, dating, and gossip. Sound good? Yes. Right, let's go for that. Session's going to work like this. I'll ask the panel to introduce themselves in a moment. I'll kick off a couple of questions. We're then using, can we have the Slido screen up? We're using Slido, so if you've got questions, type them in, use the usual stuff. You'll get the QR code and like on the screen. I'll pick those up, moderate them, we'll take them from there. Sound okay? Great. Okay, so here we go. So with no further ado, perhaps I could ask the panel. Pearse, maybe you could start. Tell us a bit. Who are you? Who do you work for? And what are you excited about and working on right now? Pearse.
Oh, wow. It's really great to be here. My name is Pearse Keene. I wear a few different hats. So the first is that I'm a consultant ophthalmologist, an eye doctor in Moorfields Eye Hospital just up the road. The second is that I'm a professor of what I've called artificial medical intelligence at UCL. And I just emphasize I'm not a computer scientist and I'm not an engineer, but I've somehow come to find myself leading this multidisciplinary research group that aims to develop and apply AI in healthcare. And then maybe the other thing that I might foreshadow for some of the future discussion is that part of my journey to medical AI was because back in 2015, 2016, I initiated a collaboration between Moorfields and the artificial intelligence company DeepMind. And that involved sharing a lot of anonymized NHS data with the commercial partner. And so over the last nearly 10 years now, I've had to grapple a lot with the challenges around how do we best use NHS data in an ethical, transparent way that protects patient privacy and brings benefits to the country.
Brilliant. Thank you, Pearse. Lucy.
Thanks very much. I'm Lucy Chappell. I'm Chief Scientific Advisor at the Department of Health and Social Care, and I'm Chief Executive Officer of the National Institute for Health and Care Research. So that's the R&D funding arm of the department, and it's the largest health funder in the UK. I'm also Director General in the Civil Service, but I'm seconded out from life as a clinical academic, which I still continue. So I'm a professor of obstetrics. I mainly do drug trials in pregnancy, and I'm still a practicing consultant obstetrician. So a few hats, as you say,
Very
Doug.
Good. And in your spare time, Lucy?
So really what I do is think about the role of science into policy, so advising ministers and other policymakers. And I'm one of a group of chief scientific advisors across government with Angela McLean, who took over from Patrick Vallance as the government CSA, one of us in pretty much every government department. But the flip side of that is thinking about policy into science. So I have responsibility for the research ecosystem and really thinking about what do we do to really ensure a thriving research ecosystem across health and care.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lucy. And as we go on, we're going to talk about both where we are in innovation, but crucially, as you heard from Lucy, how do we actually get that into practice? But Antonis.
Thank you, Doug. Good afternoon, everyone. So I am Antonis Antoniou. I'm Professor of Cancer Risk Prediction at the Department of Public Health and Primary Care at the University of Cambridge. And I'm also the Director of the Cancer Research UK Cancer Data-Driven Detection Initiative, or CD3 in short. So I think I'm the odd one out here. I'm not a clinician, so I'm a data scientist and a genetic epidemiologist with expertise in cancer risk prediction. And my research spans from discovery science and the development of multifactorial cancer risk prediction models to facilitate cancer risk stratification, but also I'm involved also in their clinical translation and global adoption by working collaboratively with multidisciplinary teams, both at national and international level.
Brilliant. So as you can see, we've got an amazing mix of top-level policy advice, real academic excellence, and really frontline clinical practice. So look, let me kick off. Let's talk a bit about innovation. So where are we? You know, what is state of the art in healthcare innovation or disease prediction? Lucy, perhaps you could give us, you see a lot of this. What's
Thank
happening?
you.
It's exciting.
I think you actually sort of stole some of my lines, because when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about why can't we harness all of AI that is so around us and really utilize it for health? And I'm really interested in how we continue to see that acceleration within those safety bounds. So I think there's sort of, you could dice and splice this in many ways, but I sort of want to give you a flavour of 5 of the areas where we think AI innovation in health might be really pertinent. One is sort of clinical support, where you see direct patient benefit. So really thinking about diagnostics, treatment decision support, monitoring, the patient-facing apps, for example. And you can see examples of that across stroke imaging or lung cancer imaging, and how we constantly, iteratively improve. The second one is AI for clinical operations, where you still have patient benefit, but it may be one step removed. So, for example, the ambient voice-to-text that we might use in consultations, which in doing so frees up time. Really, it's worth thinking about. You know, I do antenatal clinic, and how much time could be better spent with that direct patient contact. The third is AI for corporate services. And again, there's probably nothing so special about health for some of that corporate services. Where do we learn rapidly from others who are doing this better? But you can think about all sorts of things, for example, patient appointments, thinking about freeing up the time, thinking about how we train our workforce in an ever smarter way. The fourth is AI for sort of public health and prevention. And if you look at where we are in the health and care service, it's really clear that we need to see a major pivot to prevention. So rather than sort of just going back to what we've always done, I'm interested in how do we leapfrog on the innovation pathway and see AI being used in a much wider way. Obviously for screening, which would be one of the use cases that's being discussed, but also to think about sort of targeting that preventative work on an equity basis. And I think AI's got real opportunities there. And the fifth is sort of AI for the life sciences sector. So, real excitements, whether it's drug discovery that I'm sure is being sort of widely discussed here, thinking about clinical trial optimization, which is what I do. Again, I'm going to circle back to equity on that basis. Genomics research, so many use cases there. And again, broadly speaking, the market is alive and active, so government needs to think about where does it help, so for example in the regulation space, but not get in the way. So real excitement, but I would come back to how do we, there are some themes which I'll come back to around trust and equity, but really we've got plenty of use cases. And if you think about the AI Safety Summit, health has always been seen as a use case as long as we take people with us, rather than leave them behind.
Wow, brilliant overview. Thank you, Lucy. So a huge amount of activity going on there. Antonis, maybe if we dive a bit deeper into one disease class, cancer, what do you see as the state of the art?
Yes, so as you can imagine, this is a very active research area currently in cancer as well. So, and there have been numerous publications now using advanced analytical approaches, biostatistics, AI, machine learning to develop algorithms for both predicting the risks of developing cancer in the future in healthy or asymptomatic populations, but also for diagnosis kind of in symptomatic populations. One of the challenges I would say in the field so far has been that so far only a handful of those algorithms have actually made it into clinical practice, and there have been some estimates recently saying that less than 1% of the developed algorithms have made it into patient care. But there are a few notable exceptions. I think Lucy has touched upon those. For example, image-based analysis hold a lot of promise, and we've seen, for example, AI approaches using digital pathology, but also on the basis of X-rays, mammograms, or AI. One particular example in my area of work is using mammograms and to extract features with AI and predict the short and long-term risk of developing breast cancer, which of course then can help us to modulate the frequency of breast cancer screening. And if I was to mention one example from my own area of work, we've developed, for example, the CAN risk tools, which can be used to predict the risks of developing breast and ovarian cancer in the future. These are the first multifactorial cancer risk tools of their type that combine multimodal data on genomics, cancer family history, imaging, and lifestyle and hormonal risk factors to give more comprehensive cancer risks for women. And these have been translated into clinical practice by working closely with healthcare professionals to develop user-friendly tools. They have gained regulatory approval for use as medical devices. So they're available at canrisk.org if anyone is interested in using those. And they're widely used now. For example, since about 3.5 years ago when those were released, there are now more than 20,000 registered healthcare professionals using those tools, and there have been more than 2.1 million risk assessments by healthcare professionals to inform decisions on breast and ovarian cancer risk management, for example, on introducing screening at a younger age, more frequent screening, or taking decisions around risk-reducing surgery or risk-reducing medication, so also in prevention as well. But there are a few other examples here.
Wonderful. Yeah, fascinating. And let me just come back on one quick point there, because we're going to talk about some of the barriers to implementation in a moment, but I think you said only 1% of the algorithms in deployment. I mean, candidly, is that because the rest just don't work, or just because there's something else that gets in the way?
Well, yeah, I think it's a topical issue. I think getting the algorithms into clinical practice is a long process. So at least for us, I mean, people come from academia, and a lot of the excitement usually is at the initial parts where you use your data, discover novel cancer risk factors, develop the multifactorial risk models. That's where a lot of the innovation is, and where we are being rewarded in academia. But in order to make the full transition, then you need to take the extra steps. You need to validate those algorithms in independent prospective studies to assess clinical validity, develop the user-friendly applications that healthcare professionals can use, gain regulatory approval because those are medical devices, but then also assess their clinical utility. Are they making a change in clinical management? And then operationalize this also within clinical practice. What are the barriers and facilitators in that process? So it's a long process, but we tend to focus on the first part usually here.
Very good. I'll come to Pearse in a moment, but Lucy, did you want to chip in on that?
Just briefly, I was going to say it's great to build an algorithm, but what you're actually asking is, does it change downstream outcomes?
Yeah.
And I think that's true for a lot of diagnostic tests, to be clear. It's not, AI is not so special in that area. And actually, we're going to be talking about improving disease detection, and there are huge opportunities, but we also have to check ourselves and say, are we detecting disease that matters? And does it, as you say, does it actually change decision-making for the better? So just sort of assuming that all increased disease detection is a good thing without considering the wider picture, it would be limited.
Great. We'll come back to that important point in a second. And by the way, quick plug, if you've got questions, some great ones coming in, but just do jump on the Slido, and perhaps if you don't have it, maybe we could just put up on the screen the Slido link. Pearse, you've been at the front line. You've been an absolute pioneer in this space and doing it for a while. Where are we on this?
Well, I have a lot more to say on some of the things that you have already mentioned, but before I do, where are we? I think we're in the 1870s.
Interesting.
And bear with me, this might be a slightly tortured analogy, but...
By the way, the Natural History Museum started construction in the 1870s. It was a good decade, come on.
So I think that there's sometimes a perception that we have that the most innovative decades have been like the last 20 years, or maybe like since the dawning of Silicon Valley or post-World War II or something like that, the digital revolution. But actually there's some people who make the argument that the 1880s was the most innovative decade, and for a variety of different reasons. But we're in the 1870s. So the 1880s was 1882 was the time when Thomas Edison, the Edison Illuminating Company, someone from their company flicked a switch and lit up Lower Manhattan with electricity. And that was commonly described as the dawning of the electrical age. Now, where we are, I think that there's a lot of similarities with the potential of AI in healthcare with the electrical age. Like, I'm really bullish about the potential. But where we are is the 1870s, where it's still a load of inventors with like prototype light bulbs that essentially they get like a journalist to come into the room and they say, here's the light bulb, and the journalist goes, wow, and then they say, and they kind of push the journalist out of the room within a few minutes, and then the light bulb fizzles out. And so Edison figured out, okay, well, his innovation was making a longer lasting light bulb, but actually that isn't the main thing. The main thing that Edison realized is that you need to have a reliable source of electricity. You need to have a distribution system or a grid. You need to have a kind of a measurement system or a meter so you can have some way to like charge people for it. And you need a network of innovations. And at the moment in healthcare, we have cool prototype AI systems, but we don't yet have this kind of broader network so that they can easily be deployed to accompany all of the other requirements that the others have talked about.
Very good. And maybe that takes us on a bit to that question about, because as you say, we've heard a few quick examples here, and I know there are many amazing innovations, lots of them out there, and getting there, but maybe not quite there in deployment. And Lucy, we should come back to some of her challenges. But from your perspective, Pearse, it's 10-ish years now at Moorfields. What's worked? What's been easy to deploy? What's been impossible?
Well,
what are the barriers been? Yeah.
So before I say some kind of like, not negative things, but things highlighting the challenges, let me just tell you the dream is still alive for us, that we will have an AI system that is used by millions of people all around the world. But let me tell you, we started the collaboration in 2016 with DeepMind. We published a paper in Nature Medicine in 2018. 2024, that algorithm is still not actually being used in routine care. And you see the hype from people like me about this, but actually it's not yet out there. And so I guess all of the things that Lucy and Antonis have said are entirely true, but one of the other things that I've come to realize as well is that when I started this process, I think I was a typical kind of naive clinician who just had this idea, let's just focus on where the most patient need is and develop an algorithm to address that, and then the rest will all follow. But actually, what I've come to learn is no one yet or barely anyone I can think of in the world of medical AI has figured out the business model for these AI systems. Who's going to pay for them? Because it takes millions to develop them and then millions to maintain them. And is it going to be a click fee? Is it going to be a subscription? Is it going to be bundled free as part of you buy a new kit? Or is it something else? And if someone's going to pay for it, then actually the healthcare systems need to have the right evidence to support all those things. So now I'm kind of thinking, like, actually, if you want to go on this like 10-year journey to make stuff happen, you need to have a good business model from the start.
Got it.
It's very alien for us academics.
Interesting. And maybe, Pearse, you could just, because I think Lucy also asked a great question, which is what's the patient outcome, what's the benefit? Perhaps paint us a little bit of a picture. This amazing algorithm you've developed.
Yeah.
What's it going to do for a patient?
Well, so one of the things that some people don't know about ophthalmology is that since 2017, ophthalmology has been the busiest medical specialty in all of the NHS in terms of clinic appointments. Nearly 10% of all clinic appointments are for eyes.
Wow.
And so the problem is that there are people going blind in the UK because of delays in being seen and treated. And that's to say nothing of the more global perspective. And so the problem is that we just have huge numbers of referrals. So as one example, the commonest cause of blindness in the UK is age-related macular degeneration, AMD. And every day, 400 people, every single day, 400 people in the UK develop the blinding form of AMD. Now in 2016, when we were starting this collaboration, at Moorfields, we had 7,000 urgent new patient referrals from the community as possible wet AMD, the severe form of the condition. Now, of those 7,000, only 800 of them actually had this condition. So for me, what motivated me was maybe we can use an AI algorithm at some kind of community setting
To really
to
spot the high
prioritize
response.
the people
Got
with
it.
most sight-threatening disease.
Got it. Fantastic. Wow. So that sounded pretty compelling, Lucy. We're going to, simplifying, we're going to stop people going blind. You know, it sounds simple. Maybe you could say a little bit about from your perspective, because you have this amazing view. What is it that stops us just deploying those algorithms tomorrow?
Thank you. I mean, I do see things from the system perspective because of my role, but I always start with the needs of the patient and then circle back at the end to say, are we still addressing those? Because it's sort of, as a clinician, it's second nature to do that. But when I go into my sort of role across the systems and policy, you have to keep that. So I think, as with most tech, and it's a question of whether we should do exceptionalism with AI or not. And just for a moment, tech sort of goes through 4 stages. The first is creation and development. The second is evidence generation. The third is regulations and approval. And the fourth is that commissioning and adoption piece that you've heard about. So I was thinking about, to what extent is AI another type of tech? Because it does need to go through those. And to what extent have you heard from Pearse and others about the specific needs? So if you think about that pathway, do we have the right demand signalling? And actually, Pearse has talked a bit about what drives that demand signalling. I think that is hugely helpful, both from an academic and charity basis, but also from an industry basis. Are we ready, and do we have the right sort of key data and data infrastructure? You know, the digital maturity is crucial, and it's so important. I mean, it's just, I think everyone knows that the importance of non-biased representative data, and with that has to be built in that trust and trustworthiness. Otherwise, we're just lost before we've started. The third one is, as head of NIHR, I sort of stay awake thinking about evolving research methodology. So I'm a trialist. I think that most things obviously can be fixed by doing, A versus B. But I think we need different research methodology. And one of the really interesting things that you described, Pearse, is if you think about drugs, you often do additive healthcare. Whereas if you think about tech and AI, you often need to do replacement pathway healthcare. And sometimes we're not as well set up for thinking through those routes. So I'm quite sure that not only do we need some different methodology, but some more agile methodology. The fourth is, are we funding the right projects and in the timely fashion? NIHR and the NHS AI Lab have been real sort of groundbreakers in pushing this, and our portfolios are extensive. I chaired the AI and multiple long-term conditions call before I took on this job. And it's clear that there were plenty, that the appetite from the community was high, but funders need to keep up with that. And the fifth area is the innovative regulatory approach, which we are exploring. So MHRA, but also NICE on approvals, and really thinking that whereas a drug is pretty much a stable compound, not anymore, they are evolving rapidly. But our processes for drug regulation need to adapt for things like AI regulation. And then I sort of thought of 3 cross-cutting areas, which I think you'll all recognise. Equity, equity, equity. I mean, it is just so important. If you look at what we've been doing in NIHR, we've been really thinking about research inclusion across all of what we do. And actually, it should be the norm for 2 reasons: scientific excellence and economic impact. Because if you don't have a non-biased, and if you don't have if you have an unrepresentative sample or data set, then your end product will just not have the impact you need. And that's science and economics, not the fluffy stuff. That is crucial. The second is the workforce, and touching on what we need from that. I think AI needs to become everybody's business. We don't all need our workforce to code or to understand it. We need them to adopt it. And then the third is that engagement and partnership, partnered with ethics, to say, again, the vision should be that AI in health should be with people and for people, not done to people. And I think if we think about those sort of the areas along the translational, what I call a translational cycle, but also those sort of underpinning foundational areas, if it on one hand, it might look like boiling the ocean. A lot of this is what we should be doing already, and we need to adapt it for our AI approach.
Great stuff. Brilliant. Well, look, I'm going to go to a few questions from the Slido, because I think they pick up a couple of really interesting themes in terms of some of the potential barriers to adoption. And Lucy, you mentioned equity, and Antonis, I'm going to throw this one at you. There's 2 or 3 questions around this, but broadly speaking, Yeah, I think the audience is rightly worried about the issue of bias. How can AI accurately diagnose diseases when it comes to underrepresented or minorities groups? And we've seen lots of stuff, as you know, about the biases. Pearse, you made the point that you're looking for a relatively small number of cases in a large universe. When you overlay that, Antonis, from the cancer perspective, how do we make sure we're not only detecting cancer in, let's just say, some ethnic groups and not other ethnic groups?
Absolutely. I mean, this is a critical question, and that's where I guess kind of possibly big data comes into.
Yep.
So, for example, if we expand our data resources to have access to the population scale electronic health records, where then those are hopefully more representative of the entire population, then we are minimizing such biases. We need to be making concerted efforts, in particular when it comes to multi-omics, genomics, now kind of on targeting ethnic minority populations and getting samples from those populations to get the right data. But I see I'm a statistician in terms of my background, so there are methodologies as well where we can try to address those issues as well. So how can we, for example, use methodologies that ensure that we are not just developing algorithms that are appropriate for those who engage with the healthcare system, that the kind of people with groups with disabilities are also represented. And there is a lot of methodological work that is ongoing now in the field.
Great, good. You know, I'm really pleased you said that. I mean, Kathy unfortunately wasn't able, she's too unwell to be with us today, but I know if Kathy were here, and Kathy is the Chief Scientist of Health Data Research UK, she would absolutely have supported your point that if you want to eliminate biases and spot rare diseases, you need really, really, really big population data sets. And if you want really, really large population data sets with lots of longitudinal data and primary healthcare and secondary and lifetime things, I think, Lucy, to your point, you kind of need consent. And, you know, this is cropping up a lot. But Pearse, how do you go and persuade the patient this is in their interest?
Could I slightly disagree
Please.
with that statement, actually? So back in, I think it was 2016, Dame Fiona Caldicott did a review in her role as, I think, National Data Guardian at the time of what is the best mechanism in terms of use of routinely collected data. So informed consent or opt-in or opt-out systems. And I think there's actually, the temptation might be to say informed consent is the best, but actually there's nuances to this as well. And so the informed consent model is one that is mainly used in the context of a clinical trial where some sort of treatment or some sort of change to treatment is given, and that could have effects. Whereas a lot of what we're talking about is retrospective analysis of anonymized data. And one of the pledges of the NHS Constitution is to use retrospective anonymized data for the good of all the patients on the NHS. Now, if you're talking about an opt-in system, you might say, well, okay, maybe that's a good solution, opt-in. But the problem is, what happens if the people who opt in tend to be like white Irish people in their mid-40s? And what happens if certain groups don't opt in? Then we're going to have a real issue with something that my friend Alistair Dennison calls health data poverty. So ultimately, Dame Caldicott at that time said that for these retrospective anonymized studies, an opt-out would be a good thing. And actually, I think that's one of the big strengths that the UK has, that we have ability to opt out. And of course, there's lots of ways that could be done better and potential issues with that. But I think, that's my...
No, it's brilliant. Great. Well, should we test that with this audience? Why don't we do that? We've got a really AI-savvy, passionate, innovative audience. Yes, great. Lights up. So you've just heard a case here that this is so important. Obviously anonymized, properly protected, we'll never lose it, all of that sort of stuff. It's going to be an automated unless you opt out, okay? So who, on that basis, knowing all of those amazing benefits you've heard, who's willing to let their data be used forever? Hands up. Pretty good. Who's going to opt out? Yeah, interesting. Okay, well, that's encouraging. Great. You have a new policy, Lucy, I think. You heard this is policy made on the fly or something like that. Yeah. Lucy, do you want to talk a bit about that? Because obviously that's something that's very, very close to the policy heart. Yeah. And well done, Pearse. Sounds like you've got a lot of support in this audience at least. Thank you.
So I think that all those voices are important. The policy paper was called Data Saves Lives, that the government produced. And if you start from that approach, that's good, but you don't have that trust as given. You earn that trust and you have to keep that trust. And you have to keep on coming back to saying, why is it so important? I think there is something critical. Both, I think Pearse is right about the opt-out. There is something fundamental about saying that there is the ability to use data, but only when it's for primary purposes or for planning purposes and not for research. My vision is actually that research is part of care and that they are completely seen as the same concept. So we work hard to embed research across clinical care. But again, it comes back to you can only do that if people trust the research and the researchers. One of the concepts that I think we should give more airtime to is making the results visible and tangible to the populations who you need to reach most. So rather than sort of the bias towards, the vicious circle of both a bias in the research and then the results, if we have a bent towards working with the groups who may have where there may be the biggest barriers to reaching them, and saying make the research relevant to them, and then the others will come with you. And I'd be really interested to see, where you think this might be in cancer, for example, of how we drive that trust from working with those where we seek to earn it most.
Do you want to comment a bit on that?
Yeah, related to that, with my other hat on as the director of the CIUK Cancer Data-Driven Detection Initiative, that's exactly what we are trying to do now. It is a kind of this is an initiative for those who are not familiar with the initiative. It is an ambitious new initiative that is led by Cancer Research UK, but also the Alan Turing Institute, HDR UK, ADR UK, but supported also by NIHR, NEP, SRC, that aims to capitalize on the large-scale data resources and advanced analytics to transform our understanding of who is most at risk of developing cancer, and therefore improve our ability to prevent, detect, and diagnose cancer early, and do it in ways that are kind of highly attentive to equity as well. And key to this is multidisciplinary approach. So the idea is to create a multidisciplinary research community, which also includes patients, public, the health care professionals, and all the other health system stakeholders to utilize kind of the strengths that we have in the UK when it comes to the population scale, electronic health records, the advanced analytics, so all the advances that have been made in science, in epidemiology, in multiomics, and so on, to kind of help us develop those kind of tools that can be used in practice, but with clear line of sight to clinical impact. Yeah.
And Antonis, just on that a second, because we heard a very compelling story about what we could potentially do in sort of eye surgery. On cancer, as you say, I'd love to understand how close we are to that, because again, forgive me, it's probably 18 months or so since I last checked the numbers, but cancer's an enormous focus, well-funded, lots of research, lots of data. And yet last time I checked, something like 60% of all cancers in the UK were first detected in an A&E department, typically at stage 3, stage 4, with 6 months left to live. So it feels like there's quite a gap between where we are in practice today and the sort of dream you're holding out here.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what the gap that this initiative is trying to address now, right, in a way, because it's an ambitious new initiative, yep, kind of large in terms of scale. So yeah, and trying to address precisely these issues. So we have 3 areas of focus in particular on looking at kind of multi-cancer risk prediction in healthy and asymptomatic populations. Trying to improve risk stratification among for cancers with cancer screening programs currently in the UK to improve those screening programs, but also in symptomatic populations, how we can improve risk stratification there and improve those kind of the efficiency in those diagnostic pathways and resolve some of the bottlenecks that we have at the moment.
Brilliant. So there's a hope of being able to close that gap fairly soon.
Absolutely.
That would be amazing. Great. I'm going to turn to another audience question, and I'm going to point this particularly at, I think, at Pearse and Lucy as our clinicians here. Has anybody who's ever rolled out any AI system, people done that? There's always this question about, well, what about me, my job, etc. And at the front line, you have clinicians, doctors, your colleagues, etc. So you've got some great questions here, a number of questions around it, but let me just pick one, which is, how do you bring the doctor with you, who's not an AI expert, whose every fibre of their being is about my professional judgment. I can look at that patient, I know. And Antonis is some actuary is going to replace me with a machine. Really? How do you bring the clinicians with you? Or what is the role of the clinician in this sort of amazing future world with this amazing prediction? Lucy, you want to go first?
So I'm the very much a non-specialist. I'm a clinician who would welcome the ability to do my job better and to spend more of my time doing where I think I add value. And I think we should challenge ourselves as to which bit of the consultations are useful. And in fact, I'm very keen on reducing unwanted variation between clinicians, so using national guidelines to drive up outcomes. But I think there are substantial amounts of our consultations which are lower value, where I would welcome technical input, for example, AI. I had a really interesting conversation with the president of the Royal College of Radiologists, where we are seeing backlogs in imaging. She's not threatened by this. She sees this as an opportunity, because if you look at the backlog, for example, in reading chest x-rays, or if you look at the turnaround time for reading brain scans with someone with a stroke, this is an opportunity. This is not a replacement for the workforce. This is enabling the workforce to do what they would like to focus on most. So I think if it's presented in a where do you utilise healthcare professionals best, and that's across the whole of the health and social care system, which is the department that I sit in, then you start saying your job becomes more rewarding, not less rewarding. I don't want people to think I'm naive or just that's a rosy picture. I recognise where there may be people feeling, the workforce feeling that it's a threat. But I think if you actually talk to individuals and equip them with the skills, then they'll see, there's more than enough work to go around right now. And I think AI could be seen with the appropriate deployment. And there's work that NHS is doing, both on sort of the diagnostics fund, the deployment platform, to try and streamline some of this, so that it, rather than coming with lots of additional hassle, it becomes something that trusts and health and care professionals can take up.
Got it. So you see this very much in the spirit of turning humans into superhumans by giving them more tools, extra tools, scale it faster.
Yes, and utilising the clinician's time wisely.
Got it. But still with that clinician very much at the heart of the process?
Yes, very much so. And also thinking about how can I deliver medicine in a smarter way. So, for example, just as you describe, a lot of our interventions are sort of almost blanket interventions. I'm doing a trial of antihypertensives in pregnancy. It's a very sort of, we don't tailor it. So if you think about just exactly the challenge that Pearse described, but any health and care professionals can name the same thing, where you're swamped, and what you're trying to do is find the important case in the clinical setting, and then get the right treatment at the right time. And if we can do that with the assistance of AI that works, that is safe, and that crucially avoids the biases that we've been talking about, then it will help our lives, not hinder them.
Got it. Brilliant. Pearse, from Moorfields, is that the experience? Or?
Well, I think we're still so early.
Back in the 1870s at Moorfields.
Back in the 1870s, but I don't know whether I should give this story, tell the story or not. But when I was a medical student back in Ireland, I used to watch the TV show ER a lot with George Clooney, and I think that probably was a big motivation to study medicine.
You can see it in his looks. Clooney sits before us today, or something like that. Yeah.
And thank you. That's very kind of you. But actually, I remember when I qualified as a doctor in Dublin, and I was working almost overnight, I could not watch ER on TV at all. It was like nails on a blackboard to me. And it was because I felt like the reality of my life as a junior doctor was so different from what was shown with George Clooney saving the life of some young child and doing some heroic stuff. And the life of a junior doctor is filled with so much other tedious, monotonous, senseless kind of rubbish, basically.
You're really selling this as a career.
I know, and
totally.
particularly you think like, why the heck did I do medicine? Like this is bloody awful, you know. But then gradually you kind of learn survival skills, and you kind of like become more senior and so on, and it becomes kind of tolerable. But you've caught me on
that was code for
one
dump
of
on
these
your
days.
juniors. Just
Yeah. But actually, you know, is there? So I think the 2 points are, the first thing is that it's about reducing a lot of that unnecessary work. But then the other point I agree with about superhuman is if you have someone who is a world-leading radiologist, the current AI technologies are quite far from being able to replace what they do. And I think we underestimate the cognitive abilities they have. Whereas actually, I think the potential, at least for the next few years, is more about supercharging the capabilities of other people. Can you bring world-leading expertise out of a place like Moorfields into the community, into the homes of patients? And that for me is...
that's a really brilliant... I'd love to... Please, Lucy.
Can I be provocative as well? So I think there are some areas, and I'm interested, for example, of how we look at mental health interventions. So we've got two challenges. And we've got a waiting list problem at the moment, as people will be aware. So, and we've also got a burgeoning need for mental health interventions. So one of the things that we need to look at is what would the acceptability be of, whilst you're on the waiting list, getting, in a clinical trial, for example, getting randomized to an AI-led interaction, text-based chatbot type. And one of the things is that people are sort of, oh, I wouldn't want an AI. Well, we use AI in lots of other scenarios. It's crucial that it's done well and with the right evaluation. But when we watch this sort of, the other interesting thing about the mental health challenge is that the blurry lines between wellness and mental health problems and mental health disease is often on a spectrum. So where do we do early prevention, for example, through different routes, not necessarily, if our clinical psychologists are constrained, where do we think about it in imaginative ways? If I've got 3 teenagers, do I think that my teenagers would engage with that? Of course I do. So, just thinking about trying to approach this a bit differently, not from an 1880s perspective, but saying, should we be looking at the opportunities, and on, for example, on wait lists, where can we really understand how to get to the patients that need it most?
That's a brilliant point, Lucy, because in a sense, both you and Pearse are highlighting something which I think is incredibly important here, which is that there's often an assumption that we shouldn't touch AI decision-making until it's better than the human. And very often the value creation isn't necessarily you make better decisions, it's you make them sufficiently much faster that, to your point, we could approach every patient on the waiting list and put a sort of a first pass through it, and then those who are identified at higher risk are the ones you prioritise through. So maybe let's just have another quick test with the audience. I'm going to give you a nice hypothetical question. You can wait a year and see a GP, or Lucy will give you an AI bot tomorrow, but you have to choose one or the other. So who'd like to wait a year to see the GP? Some enthusiasm. Who'd be willing to sort of talk to Lucy's AI bot tomorrow morning? And none of the above is answered. But that's really interesting, isn't it? There you go. So, okay, well, at least amongst this slightly, no offence, biased audience. Pearse,
so I think one of the things that I've learned since I became a consultant and sort of know what I'm doing, at least in one area of medicine, is most of the time now what I do is not really about figuring out an obscure diagnosis. Most of the time I know the diagnosis within 5 seconds.
Interesting.
And it's more, and often the junior doctor has done all the hard work talking to the patient, and I just swan in and just sort of say hello, and they think I'm great and stuff like that. But
he really is now selling the profession.
No. But it's actually the human connection that's the important part, and the feeling that like they're seeing someone who has seen hundreds or thousands of people who've gone through something similar to what they've gone through. And so I think that as long as we're human, we're always going to have some kind of like Stone Age urge for human interaction. Like I don't see a situation where your smartwatch tells you you're going to go blind or you have terminal cancer. I think you're always going to want a human to have that sort of interaction.
Great point. And maybe there is, as ever, a halfway house between the two. Look, we got time for one more question from the audience, and anybody can take this, but Antonis, you might want to kick us off. Really good question about how do we think about interfacing with the sort of biometric data we can get from personal devices, phones, smartwatches, they're monitoring all of these things, you know. Can your smartwatch help us predict cancer or anything like that?
Well, again, this is a relatively unexplored area of research, and I'm not sure if the audience are aware there is an initiative now in the UK is called Smart Data Research UK that is aiming to facilitate access to this type of data, kind of resolving issues around privacy concerns, kind of equity again, which are key. But I think there is a lot of potential there in terms of, for example, monitoring physical activity and so on. So all those could potentially be used there. And there have been some studies, for example, when it comes to loyalty card data, for example, where kind of purchases were found to predict the risk of future ovarian cancer, so medication, for example, taken for indigestion and so on. So there's clearly some preliminary data there, but we haven't reached the stage where we have kind of realized the potential of using all those data at this stage. So there's a lot of potential, I would say, there.
Fascinating. Lucy, do you want?
Well, I was, when you were talking, I was slightly smiling with a memory which might be shared by some women in this room, which is that their smartwatch often gives them the first sign that they're pregnant because of the changes that you see in your heart rate and sometimes your respiratory rate. One of my colleagues knew that I was pregnant when I got breathless, way before I did, I think. Wow. So I am definitely excited in the opportunities of wearables, and it comes back to understanding that very large data source, integrating it in a sensible way, and then sort of saying, what's the evidence, which is what drives me. But thinking about the utility of that it's patient-owned, thinking about the interoperability of those data sources, and then saying using it for good. And just thinking about what this, we come back to the tightrope that we're walking, which is sort of the safety aspects versus the benefits. And it comes back to, for me, wearables is exciting because it's in the hands of the person. But again, it will only be useful if we can think about how to link it to outcomes and impact.
Brilliant. So, as we've heard, some incredibly exciting innovation going on. A lot of barriers, and quite a gap between what we all, I think, on this panel believe is the potential and where we are today. Maybe if I could ask you each just to, I'll just give you 60 seconds each just to sort of sum up and close. But just tell me, each of you, and Pearse, you might want to kick us off, what are you most optimistic about?
Well, so let me think. A few months ago, there was an issue of The Economist magazine that had the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, on the cover, and it had something like BritGPT, it was the cover, and there was a BBC microcomputer on the cover. And basically, the article was about, can the UK be an AI superpower? And there was lots of reasons why it couldn't compete with the US and Japan and China, but actually, it did highlight the NHS and the UK universities. And I just felt like this is the reason why I'm in the UK, because if we can just get our act together, if we can link these two better, then the UK could be an AI superpower in this space.
That's pretty compelling, Antonis.
Marcus, I would say I'm really excited by the fact that funders like Cancer Research UK and IHR and other funders are now willing to support initiatives like the CD3 initiative. I mean, as a data scientist who has been working in the field of cancer risk prediction, we've been arguing for this type of initiatives for many years. So it is great that this is happening, and now is exactly what we need to move the field of data-driven cancer detection forward. And I'm confident that this, together with the assets and the resources and tools that are being developed by this initiative, but also by HDR UK, the Turing Institute, and ADR UK, kind of will transform the way that we perform cancer risk prediction in the near future. We'll be wondering how we were able to do this type of research without having those resources.
Brilliant.
I think in a few years' time.
That's pretty encouraging. Lucy, we'll give you the final word. What are you optimistic about?
So I'm optimistic that we're in a country with an audience like this who are genuinely interested in AI for good, but have a reasonable and realistic understanding of the challenges. There are other countries that may be more trammeled by either not caring about those tramlines. We do, and I think that with the science, the infrastructure, the NHS, organisations like the Turing, we've got real hope that we will walk that tightrope appropriately, and so that we will see AI for good for patient benefit.
Wonderful. Thank you for being a brilliant audience. Thank you for your participation, great questions. Thank you to the panel, who's been amazing. It's great to have such world-class experts here. And enjoy the rest of AI UK. Thank you.